As I previously mentioned, this annual meeting is broadcast to members via the webcast. These members are able to participate in the question period by emailing amed.ocswssw@gmail.com. Once an email is received, it will be read by one of the college staff, Pat Lieberman. I will take 3 questions from the floor and then check to see if there are any questions from Pat. If a question received by email has already been asked and answered, Pat will read the next question. If there are more email questions than time permits, college staff will respond to the questions via email within the next 2 weeks. I now invite questions. Please raise your hand. There's college staff with microphones on the floor. Paul, there's a question behind you. Okay.
Hi. Hello. I have a question about the deficiency of revenue over expenses. This is my first time at one of these meetings, but I just wondered, is that something that is normally, does that happen? It's gone from 191,000 to 682,000, and I just thought it concerned me a little bit.
Sure, thank you very much for the question. Talia, would you like to respond?
As Lisa and I both mentioned, the college does plan for deficits because they have a surplus of about $6.5 million that they like to draw down on. They purposely take into account projects and things that will lead them to this deficit. It is planned. It is what they actually planned for more originally, but there was some staffing and some other projects that didn't happen. So yes, it is definitely planned. In 2009, they made a decision to go ahead and to draw down on the surplus. They, at that point, I think it was 9 million. 9 million? It was, yeah. So every year we've taken it down a little bit. Council decides, they budget for it. We help them with it, but it's definitely part of the plan and not something concerning.
Thank you, Talia.
I heard you make a comment about the removal of the provisional class. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure, thank you. Lise?
Well, I'm very glad for that lead-in question to talking about the work that the college has done with proposed amendments to the registration regulation. So the elimination of the provisional class of registration is part of the proposed amendments, which are with the ministry at this point, and which we're very hopeful that we're in the process that we're very hopeful that we're in the final stages of. So the provisional class of registration was a class of registration that's sometimes known as grandparenting. So people who, there was a window at the beginning of the college's operations at which time members of the college could register without meeting the general registration requirements, but they could meet other requirements set out in the provisional class. And it has been obviously quite a few years. We used to say we were a young college, but we're no longer a young college, and for a number of reasons we've decided to eliminate the provisional or propose an elimination of the provisional class of registration. So those remaining members with a provisional certificate of registration would transition to a general certificate of registration.
Will there be any additional qualifying or processing that's required?
In the proposed amendments, no, there will not be, and the reason there was careful consideration of this proposed amendment. Those practicing with provisional certificates of registration have not demonstrated any concern in terms of their competence, their professional and ethical practice, and for that reason it was determined that it was appropriate to at this point transition to them into the general class of registration, assuming the amendments to the registration regulation are approved.
So will people be contacted, or do we need to apply? How will that work?
So perhaps for the details of the transition, as I would love to sort of jump ahead and say that we've implemented the amendments to the registration regulation, but they are still in process. And we have already communicated with provisional members around previous issues, we certainly will stay in close communication with members of the college who are affected by not just that amendment to the registration regulation, but others that will affect members. So if you have any specific questions, you're certainly welcome to contact the college and the college staff for all of those details. But as a sort of an overarching statement, the amendments would mean that those holding a provisional certificate of registration would be transitioned into the general category. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about the stage of, what stage are we with the Act of Psychotherapy, the college? And when is the proclamation going to happen? And what are the chances we're going to get a positive acceptance of the proclamation as social workers? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. It's the $6 million question. Please, I'll let you answer that one.
And it's actually going up from 6 million as we speak. So it's a very important question. We're very aware of how concerned you as our members are about the issue of the regulation of psychotherapy. And of course, from our perspective as the regulators of social work and social service work practice in Ontario, we approach that issue from a particular perspective. And I know that our colleagues from the Ontario Association of Social Workers approach it from the perspective of an association and other concerns. So we're very aware of how important an issue this is. The college has worked around the issue of the regulation of psychotherapy for many years, actually predating my time with the college, and that's 7.5 years ago. The college has worked with the other colleges whose members will have access to the Controlled Act once it's proclaimed, and most recently in the last couple of years worked at the request of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care to produce a clarification document to help clarify the Controlled Act. So the definition of the Controlled Act was not something that was open to discussion, but to help people understand what the Controlled Act entailed. And I hope that many of you will have seen that clarification document as part of the consultation process that we, along with the other colleges, engaged in the spring. That was January, February of 2017, to think for a moment. And those, the feedback from the consultation was compiled and is now in the hands of the ministry. And it really is unfortunately impossible to say exactly what will happen with that. We've done everything that we can to not only help to provide clarification around the Controlled Act of Psychotherapy, but also to state clearly, and this was all the colleges involved, that in our view, we strongly support proclamation of the Controlled Act of Psychotherapy. So what I can say is that we will be extremely diligent in continuing to communicate with you as members as this issue continues to unfold. And I do wish that I had the answer to the $6 million question as to when that might be.
Thank you. Pat, do we have any email questions? No. So then let's ask for other questions from the floor. Are there any?
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to ask a question. I noticed that the fees went up for this year. Would that be an annual increase in fees, or will there be, you know, like a...
Who would like to respond, please?
So I mentioned in my report that the college reviews its budget and makes a decision about fees each year and makes a recommendation, the council makes a recommendation for the year to come. And I do want to say that the college considers this issue very carefully. You've heard about the budget discussion, and Talia spoke about the intentional draw on the reserve. I also spoke to the fact that the college is facing different budgetary times as we draw down on the deficit and as we return to a balanced budget. I want to emphasize that that is an intentional process each year. And the fees are one of all of these variables are what's considered in determining fees for the year to come. So it's not possible to predict ahead of that time, but the college carefully examines cash flow and the draw on the reserve in order to make a very careful and cautious decision about fees for the year to come. I should mention in conclusion that there is a cost to regulation. There are fixed expenses associated with regulation. There's also a consensus that regulation is an extremely important function and expectation. And so there are costs associated with that. And so those are some of the variables that the college has to consider carefully when setting the fees for the year to come.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, Joan.
I'm stepping slightly out of my role as a guest, but I would like to encourage those of you who are interested in learning more about passage of the Psychotherapy Act and advocacy related to it to visit OASW's website, and there is a passpsychotherapyact.ca, and I would encourage you to consider looking at visiting that website. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Microphone in the back here, Paul.
Hello? Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, at some point this year, I think we received an email about a licensing examination and that it's currently in development. Is that, how far in the future are we looking for? Is that in the college's plan? I'm just curious about that.
Thank you for that question, and I'm going to ask Lise to please respond.
I'm wondering, and I don't want to speculate, but I'm wondering if one of the things that you might be referring to is having seen the college's strategic plan for 2016 to 19, and one of the strategic objectives under promoting ethical and professional practice was reference to exploring next steps with respect to an entry to practice exam. And that language, I believe, was chosen very specifically by council to indicate it was not something that was just about to happen. And in fact, council has very carefully considered the issue of the entry to practice exam because, as you may be aware, although the only regulator at this point, the only social work regulator in Canada with an entry to practice exam is BC, British Columbia College of Social Workers. In the States, there is an entry to practice exam in almost all jurisdictions. However, after careful consideration of this issue, the council continues to carefully monitor developments because there's an important landscape to consider in terms of the introduction of an entry to practice exam, but is not moving ahead with the introduction of an entry to practice exam at this point. So what I want to say is that the college keeps very well aware of the landscape with respect to that issue, but it's not something imminent or that council is considering at this point.
Thank you. And we have a question from the webcast. Pat, please.
It was mentioned that changes are coming to defining a new class of membership for retired members. Are members who retire required to join the college under this class, or is it possible to just withdraw one's membership?
Lise, would you respond?
So again, the elimination of the retired, the creation, getting mixed up here, the creation of a retired class of certificate of registration is something that some of you may have even called the college about and sort of expressed interest in. It's been, using the word landscape, it's been on the landscape for a number of years now, and we've been very aware of that. The college currently has an inactive class of registration, and that means that intended for those who are not currently practicing, but it may be used by those who are not currently practicing but intend to move back into practice. The retired class of certificate of registration proposed in the registration regulation amendments would be intended for people who were members of the college, wanted to continue to be members of the college, but had no intention of practicing, and this is the key, or returning to practice. So certainly, current members of the college who retire and who no longer want to be members of the college would resign as they do currently. But if they want to continue to be members of the college but not practicing and not intending to practice in the future, those members would be members, could become members of the retired class. And so there are a number of policy decisions that will need to be made by council once the registration regulation amendments have been finalized, and so those details are certainly to come, and we don't want to jump ahead to assuming that they absolutely will come, but that would be the intention. So in a nutshell, somebody who has retired from the practice of social work, has no intention of calling themselves a social worker, social service worker, registered social service worker, or holding themselves out as a social worker or social service worker, would not need to continue to be a member of the college. But the proposed amendments were responding to that desire of a fair number of members of the college who wanted to continue to be members, but as I said, had no intention of practicing again.
Julian from Mississauga. Just looking at the increase in rent that we are paying, it's around 110. The last time I checked my pay stub, I did not receive such a huge increase.
Yes.
Leap forward, say, in 2020. This is how I look at myself and my college. Maybe we could have satellite offices in Barrie, in London, in the East, have a smaller office in Toronto. The rent would be taken care of. My membership would be much less. Thank you.
I will ask Liz to respond to your query.
Well, you did raise a number of points. I want to emphasize, and I spoke to this in my report somewhat, is that regulation comes with certain obligations. And actually, I think it's very important to note that those obligations don't change depending on what size of college you are. So we are actually, we're a fairly mid-sized college. We're even probably verging on being a large college. And the number of operations that you'll see reflected in complaints, the complaints and discipline processes, the reports on that, on professional practice, on all of those things, there are a couple of things that are extremely important for a regulatory body to be able to fulfill its obligations, and one of those is rent. So it's not comparable to the practice of social work or social service work in an agency across the province. The regulatory sector and the regulatory role is very specific. And I can assure you that the college manages all of its resources extremely prudently, extremely carefully. And rent is really one of the costs of doing business. Space is one of the costs of doing business. Holding a hearing, taking phone calls, responding and doing outreach, all of these things are important aspects of what the college does, and all of them require staff and a physical space. But we continue to look at those issues very carefully. We lease premises in Toronto that are not in any way excessive to the purposes that the college and the mandate and the activities that the college is required to do. But I certainly value the question, because I think it's important to be able to ask those questions and really to understand what it is that a regulator does, what's the role of a regulator, and how do we examine our practices. And I can tell you we're very careful about doing that, and in fact over the past year have very carefully looked at all of our organizational processes and our staffing. So thank you.
Some reports suggest, and the numbers suggest, that there is more than 80% member of our college membership are women, and that's a good sign that we should have more women members in this profession, because the clients we serve every day are more women and children, more vulnerable than the men. And that's what we find every day our professional life. But I think there is the huge imbalance in gender gap. It's very huge gender gap, because the 80 and 20%, I think, is there any plan or consultation colleges thinking for to address this gender gap?
Do you mean in the membership to the college?
In a membership or as a professional development in general, so like to promote more men member in this profession and education.
Would you like to address this?
So I imagine from the, from the question and from the acknowledgement of your question in the audience that this is an issue of concern to you and perhaps of other members here. But I want to emphasize what the role of the college is, and that all of the college's activities and its mandate are set out in the Social Work and Social Service Work Act. So everything that the college does has to fall within, fall under the Act and fall within our mandate of public protection. So employment issues, and that would include the issue of the gender disparity in the profession, or in the professions, the practice of the professions, the 80%, 20% that you're referring to, and I'm not actually familiar with the exact demographic, because that is something that the associations would really have a clearer understanding of. So promoting the professions and promoting greater gender representation in the profession is really not something that falls under the mandate of the college, although I certainly appreciate where that question and interest might be coming from.
My first question is regarding the salaries and benefits and the increase of $400,000. So I just wanted clarification, and for the membership, how many positions were hired for that $400,000? And my second question was the increase, well, over $232,000 for council and committee meetings. So were those off-site meetings, and what did that entail? Did it include food and other expenses? Thank you.
Thanks, Lise.
So one of the things I'd like to start with is that when looking at those lines, those are high-level lines, and it's not really appropriate in this setting for me to get into sort of the breakdown of those lines. As I mentioned, we had a number of staff vacancies in 2016, including at the senior leadership level, and there are also decisions about salary and benefits and expenses that change each year. So the college currently has a staff of 33. And the second part of your question was about meeting expenses. And I can tell you that a budget is an estimate. It's a best estimate moving forward about the year to come. And so the college predicts, based on various issues before it, how many meetings there will be. So at the college, and set out in the Act and also in bylaw, are not only the meetings of council, but also the statutory and non-statutory committees. And those committees perform some very important roles. So for example, the complaints committee, the discipline committee, the standards of practice committee, the finance committee, all of these various committees that, depending on what they're working on, will meet a number of times throughout the year. I'll give an example. The Standards of Practice Committee in 2016 worked very hard on implementing the making a recommendation with respect to the amendments to the Continuing Competence Program. So you can imagine that a 21-member council meeting on site at the college, and with the fact that we have electoral districts across the province with members of council from across the province, those meetings come with expenses. And really, once again, I guess I would come back to my point about the cost of doing business. So really, as Talia mentioned as well, it's not always useful to go comparison year by year. 2015, as many of you will know, I hope probably most of you know, was a year of quite a large amount of transition for the college. And last year was a chance to work on some of the very important issues before the college. So for example, amendments to the registration regulation, the revisions to the CCP, psychotherapy, all of these things. And those all bring with them costs in terms of meeting costs.
My concern is just about the allocation of the funds. So what have this estimated funds, what have they gone to? Have they gone to lunches? Have they gone to parking? Have they got like, because if the space is already paid for, so why is there an expense of $232,000?
Mm-hmm. And I think if you looked at regulatory bodies across Ontario and across Canada, the expenses are going to be fairly similar, but you're looking at numbers. So you're looking at, for example, the size of your council or your committees. And as you know, and it's a very important part of how the college conducts its business and fulfills its mandate, is we have members from across the province. So while there are many opportunities for leveraging technology, which we do, and which would include remote participation at meetings at times and holding remote meetings at times, there are also many requirements to hold meetings in person, which would mean that you have council members coming in from across the province for meetings. And so there can be quite a bit of variability depending on in one year who is on what committee, where they're coming from, what the length of time is for the meeting, how frequent that meeting is. It's also a much more efficient and prudent use of resources to meet the basic meeting requirements. So any organization holding a meeting would have to provide lunch when you have an all-day meeting. Most council meetings are 1 or 2 days, and so yes, there are meals provided for council members, and that's the costs.
Just a follow-up question to what she was saying. Has the college ever thought about maybe buying a property instead of renting every year? Also, what's have you been doing differently in terms of postage and courier that you were down like by $40,000? Like, what's the difference in that?
Well, you know what, I'll start with maybe I'll end with the better news, and I'll start with the reality of the college carefully examined the real estate and rental, which includes the possibility of rental and purchasing property, because this is a question that has come up for those of you who've attended the annual meeting and Education Day in the past. It comes up, if not every year, almost every year, and with good reason. We can certainly understand why you're asking that question, or why some are asking that question. I think, first of all, being in the business of real estate or holding property, and we are, here we are in Toronto with real estate prices what they are. That is a whole venture to get into that is really not part of what the college does or should be doing. And it comes with it significant risk and cost. So although the immediate assumption might be that it's more beneficial or might be put the college in a better financial position to own property, that actually is not the case. And I can tell you that one of the things that we carefully do, and that the Finance Committee carefully examined before we moved into the lease that we are currently in, so we are in a lease situation, is that it would be not profitable and more expensive, or not advisable and more expensive for the college to purchase property. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is postage and courier is a really good example of how the college is leveraging technology in order to well, obviously move forward, turn the chapter on 2016, and we have made some significant changes. One of them is no longer publishing the annual report in hard copy, but publishing it online. And as many of you know, we also were very pleased to introduce the first fully electronic issue of the Perspective newsletter that's still in a printable PDF. So you can still print it off, but you can also access it on the Perspective microsite. So these are the kinds of financial decisions that the college is looking at on a regular basis in order to make sure that we are managing our resources prudently and in the best interests of the college.
The reason why I asked this question is because I was thinking that perhaps if we can decrease some of those, we can put more funding into professional development. You know, because I see where you're paying maintenance to be higher than the professional money that's allotted for professional development, where I would think that having more money in that area would be a great access to us as members of the, this body. So to clarify, the activities of the college's professional practice department would include practice consultations, presentations across the province, the Perspective newsletter, e-bulletins, all of those kinds of things. Those are the things that support ethical and professional practice, and the CCP, I should say. And all of those things are things that support ethical and professional practice, but you won't use, they fall under different lines on the budget, various different lines on the budget. In terms of offering professional development opportunities, that's something that falls within the mandate of the association rather than the college. And so that's the reason in terms of moving those expenses around in the way that you suggest. I don't think that's something that's quite possible or that would be appropriate for the college to do. However, I did want to emphasize the postage and courier costs. The reason that you see them going down is that we're no longer mailing out all of those important practice resources to our members. So again, that was a significant savings for the college in 2016.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My question is about the college role in advocating. In the interest of protecting the public and vulnerable members, i.e. social work students and social services students who are not licensed or registered with a college, what can the college do to protect them from being exploited, bullied by field instructors and placement supervisors, as was my personal experience at U of T, where I could seek no protection?
I'm going to repeat your question, and just to make sure that I understood all of it, but it related to the college's role in protecting social work. I believe you said social work, but perhaps it could extend that to social service work students. How are social work and social service work students protected? So while there are some social work and social service work students who may already be members of the college because they already met the educational requirements for registration with the college, that isn't typically the case. And so the college registers those who meet the registration requirements that are in our registration regulation, which includes the completion of a social work degree, or a social service work diploma. And so the students in social work and social service work programs, and that's an important concern that you raise, generally do not fall under the mandate of the college, or under the authority of the college, I should say. However, they are quite possibly being supervised by members of the college, and supervision of social work and social service work students is something that falls under the scope of practice for social work and social service work. And so the questions that you raise suggest that there may be an issue there of the conduct, potentially, of a member of the college. And in that case, and that's one of the extremely important responsibilities of the college, is to have complaints and discipline processes in place, and you can find all of that information on our website, but to have complaints and discipline processes in place in which a member of the public can make a complaint about a member of the college. So I would suggest that, perhaps the details of such a situation are not something I can cover here, but if there were concern about the conduct of somebody who was a member of the college, all of the information about how to make a complaint or speaking to one of the staff in complaints and discipline, or even potentially professional practice to understand the obligations of a registered member of the college would be very important. And I think also that highlights that how important regulation is, how important registration is, and why the public is better served when the professional that they see is regulated. So all of the things that we've been talking about today really are about that important point of ensuring accountability through regulation.
Good morning. For many years, as a member of the college, we received a wallet identification card, and I realized over the last couple of years that that was discontinued. Could the college perhaps consider returning to the practice of providing that wallet identification? I think that it was very useful in showing to the public, my clients, that I am a member of a very reputable college. But it's nice to have that card to show that.
That's a great suggestion. Lise, I didn't realize. Okay, discontinued it.
So thank you, and I will start by saying I think that's so important that your clients are aware that you're a member of the college. That's a very important part of you as a registered member of the college, ensuring that your clients are aware of that fact. And certainly members post their certificate of registration at their place of work, so that that's another way of ensuring that their clients are aware. And your question about the actual member cards and they're tied to tax receipts is an important one, and I can tell you that other regulatory bodies have grappled with the same issue for some similar reasons. However, we decided to discontinue the hard copy of the member cards and tax receipts because they're quite expensive. They're tied in with the postage and courier costs that we were talking about earlier, and overall the message from the membership was that you wanted the college to move to online processes, which we did. It is still possible, though, to print out the wallet card, but I would suggest that probably an even more important message to your clients and to the public is for people to visit the public register on the college's website. And you'll notice all of our communications drive people to the college website. The reason for that is it is the most current and up-to-date register or information about all members of the college, whereas a member card is only up to date on the date that it's printed. And so for all of those reasons, that's why we made the shift, and I certainly understand your concern and your desire to have that, and I applaud you for speaking very openly and transparently with your clients about your registration with the college. As I said, you can certainly print it off, but an important message for everybody here is really to encourage the public to visit the online register of the college to find out any current information.
I have a question in regards to complaints that were processed. You mentioned that there were about 60-something complaints, more or less. I'm wondering if college members have access to information that pertains to the complaints outside of the scope of just the numbers. So maybe the nature of the complaints and what those are looking like.
So thank you for that question. The complaints process is a confidential process, and I should highlight the college receives both complaints and mandatory reports, and they contain or they relate to various themes that are outlined in the annual report. So if you go to the annual report, you can see in general terms the themes of complaints. The specifics of complaints are confidential, but the general themes of complaints or mandatory reports are reported in alternate years in our annual report. So if you were to go back to the year prior, you could see information about whether it was the, complaints or mandatory reports in alternate years. Sorry, I didn't say that very well. I hope that came through. Thank you.
Thank you. And your final question.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Diane. I'm from social worker from Toronto. I would just like you to address one of the questions that I have pertaining to financial statements. I'm looking at the insurance aspect. In 2015, the insurance was for the year $25,170, and there had been a slight increase for 2016. Could you explain the reason for the slight increase, whether there has been some increased risks in somewhere? Could you please explain the reason for this increase? And I also have another question, but I prefer you answer this one first, and then I'll go on to the other one.
I was just discussing material differences with our auditor there, which is basically the amount of increase in the insurance costs for the college is practically nothing when you look at the overall cost of insurance. So it's extremely important, as you can imagine, for the college and any organization, any regulator to have insurance. It's an important risk management practice, and it's a set cost essentially because it's offered through insurance providers. And so the cost that you see reflected with the very slight difference is really just a reflection of the fact that costs do go up, and that's part of our budget process, is that many expenses will increase by approximately 4% year over year, and that's just unfortunately a reality of operations.
Okay. Another question I have is respect to your strategic plan for 2016 up to 2018, is it, am I right? 2019? Yeah. With respect to your budget, I see that you said that you will be funding new programs. Part of the budget includes funding new programs. What I'm saying is that what are some of the key programs you all intend to fund for going forward in the strategic plan? And I'm saying this with respect to developing social workers in terms of continuing competence. I know you spoke about education before, but I'm looking at, from time to time, social workers, there are many social workers that need help in their professional practice. Every year we have this meeting in Toronto. I'm suggesting that we could probably equalize the geographical aspect of it in terms of having a meeting at different locations so that social workers wouldn't have to travel, let's say, from Oshawa to Toronto and things like that. So I think this is it could be a way that we could sort of equalize our practice in terms of having meeting at different venues. That's one. And also, I am looking at a lot of social workers do not have experience. Sometimes when you have to apply for a job, they ask for experience. And I think that the college should do a little bit more in terms of giving social workers more opportunities to have experience from especially the senior social workers. For example, going forward, we can have like mentorship programs or other programs where social workers could be more aware and we can socialize and get to know each other more. So this is what I'm saying, is that every year is only one function that we have, this yearly AGM. Why can't we not have a Christmas, sorry, for Christmas, but other social functions, my apologies, please, right? Other social functions throughout the year, that let's say at least every quarter we know social workers meet and we have, a potluck, a workshop or something. Many of us don't know each other in here. I am Diane, I'm from Toronto, right? This is me. Everybody know me. But we don't know each other, and every year just this one function. We need to do more to build relationships, to strengthen relationships within the social work profession.
Thank you so much, Diane. This is a very nice way in which we can conclude this meeting. The function of connecting one another in the profession is a function that belongs to the association. The college's function is to regulate our practice and to protect the public. They're two very distinct functions. So we're very fortunate to have Joan and Jillian here from the association. I'm sure they're taking notes. And a mentoring program for younger social workers is a great idea. It's a great idea. It is true. Those of us who've been in the field for a number of years, I think would be very happy to assist those who would want to hear from our practice savvy after all these years in the field. Absolutely, but that is not a function for the college to fulfill. So this concludes the business to be conducted at the 17th annual meeting. Thank you all for your attendance and participation. The meeting is now adjourned,